What's up, guys? Thank you for listening to today's interview. My name is Katie, and today I'm interviewing Professor Jessie Grace over Zoom about wildfires in Colorado and the message that she's delivering in her up-and-coming documentary. Jessie is a professor in journalism and media communications at CSU, specializing in video production. She's South African and has a master's degree in public communication. She's worked for clients from the U.S. National Forest to PBS. She's an acclaimed documentary filmmaker, and she's been nominated for an Emmy and has won a BEA award. And she's proven herself to be very, very successful within her field, as she has a long list of professional video work. She's currently working on 3 documentaries, one on mail-in voting, which is actually narrated by Alec Baldwin, one on gerrymandering, and one about wildfires, which we will be discussing today. Jessie happens to be one of my favorite professors, and I was very fortunate to be able to reconnect with her today to discuss what she has found out about wildfires as she continues to work on her documentary. So kick back and relax and enjoy our interview today. Here is Jessie Grace.
Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media. I know that's a mouthful, but they're a state organization. We've done a couple documentaries through them, and they are, they just, after the wildfire season in 2020, that was the chaotic one. I believe, was it 2020 or 2021? What year is it? No, it's 2020. So 2020 was a crazy wildfire season. So after that, they were like, okay, we need to do some coverage on this. Like, we should do a documentary. So they sought out funding and got some funding through, the Forest Service, through their office, and through the Colorado Office of Fire Prevention and Public Safety. And so kind of got, some money together to tell this story. And so it wasn't necessarily something that we sought out specifically. Obviously, it's a topic that we care a lot about, being here in Colorado and, liking the outdoors. And yeah, so it started with them reaching out to us and being like, cool, we want this documentary made. We'll seek funding. We want you to be the ones to make it, being Steve and I. And that's how it went. So we've been working on it since. And then 2021 was a non-existent fire season. So we're like, wow, the irony of starting a fire documentary and having a slow fire season, which is great for the environment. And then the Marshall Fire hit at the start of this year. And we're like, okay, new problems. This is insane.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, that's been our thing.
That's crazy. I didn't know that it's like somebody will reach out to you and be like, this is your topic. Go get them.
Yeah. It kind of depends. There's people who, documentary filmmakers who be like, cool, I want to do this documentary. And then they go seek funding for it. Mm-hmm. And, but yeah, because we have this, I'd say like a little bit weird, non-traditional relationship with the Office of Film, Television, Media, and they get different grants for things. And sometimes funders will come to them. And they like the relationship with CSU because the first grants that they had were just for academic grants. They wanted students to be involved and faculty to lead up the projects. So there were 2 of those first, and then they really liked what we did, so they just started giving us more stuff. So actually, other than the music documentary that Steve and I did, all the others have been their idea, or somebody's approached them and said, hey, we have some funding, we want a documentary on X. Do you have anybody? And they've come to us, and I don't know if we've declined any at this point. I can't remember, but yeah, we've become kind of their go-to for it, which is a really good thing we're very excited about, but also a lot sometimes.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so how did you go about it? What was like the first steps that you had?
Yeah, so since it was funded by some government organizations, it kind of puts us in a gray area of, okay, we want to document what's going on, but we also have clients to appease. But we don't want to turn it into a promo because then it's not a documentary.
Right.
And just like fully one-sided thing. So we started by talking to the government officials at the various organizations. So the Division of Colorado. There are so many acronyms in Colorado.
I bet.
It's like the Office of Fire Protection and Public Safety. So we had like Zoom calls with them and with the Forest Service, and like, what are some of the issues that you've seen the public have an issue with, that you guys are concerned with, where there's a disconnect? Because really they wanted to showcase what the government is doing to help and like what that looks like. Because some people were very angry and were like, oh, the government should have done more. And other people like, no, the citizens should have done more. So really it's just from an education standpoint, it's figuring out what is the message. So we started out with Zoom calls with them, scheduled some interviews with the various stakeholders, I guess, at their organization, and they've just been following the story since then, because they're like, oh, there's somebody who lost their home here, or there's somebody whose home was saved in the fire, and this is why they saved it, and this is, this person has footage, and this person has a story, and it just kind of following the bunny trail of where it goes. So.
Totally. And was this all like Colorado based, or did you kind of branch out and go to different states? Because I know you were traveling a bit last semester too.
Yeah, so the traveling was mainly for the voting documentary.
Oh, that's right. I was like, what was the other one? Because I know there was a music, voting. Got it.
Yes, voting. So that was the one we were traveling for. The fire one is Colorado specific. So we really wanted to talk about wildfires in Colorado. We'll probably talk about California in relation to it and how it differs and how it's the same, that type of thing. But it's a Colorado story. We're not traveling out of the state.
Okay. And is this the one that Alec Baldwin was involved with?
The voting.
The voting one? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. So you kind of found people through like word of mouth for the interviewing process after you got in touch with like the government people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were like, oh, we know somebody here, or we know somebody there. Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple people that we just, cold reached out to and we're like, hey, are you interested in doing this? But for the most part, it's been referrals.
Totally. And did you find any like commonalities between the people that you were interviewing? Like, did they have a similar perspective? Was it super diverse? Were people angry?
So we really need to talk to some more, let's say, civilians. I don't want to use that word, but like civilians as opposed to officials for the rest of the story. And especially with the Marshall Fire, we need to talk to some of the survivors of that. I've heard there's some issues with the word victims. So survivors seems to be a more positive one and see their perspective. But I mean, the common standpoint of the government is, hey, we're doing the best we can, and this is the situation. There's no such thing as enough mitigation, because a lot of citizens are like, oh, you should mitigate more. And they're like, we could mitigate, take all of your tax money and spend all of that doing mitigation, and something is still going to burn. Like, there's nothing we can do. It's physically impossible to do that, and that's not a realistic situation. So we have to balance mitigation versus suppression, which is fire burns, we have to go put it out. Right. And then recovery, of course, when something burns, they have to rebuild. And so that's a common discussion in the in the various government and state organizations of, okay, how do we balance mitigation versus suppression? And who's in charge of this fire? And it's a really complicated network, because if it's in a certain region, if it's under a certain size, it's just the district. And then if it gets to a certain size, you have to take state funding. It's a mess. Oh my God. But now that's the main issue with them, mitigation versus suppression. How do we balance this? With the public has been frustrated with just, has the state done enough? They should have done more, or whatever it is. And but there's a big sense of needing to take care of your own property. So the people who did a pretty good job of taking care of their own property were more likely to have their homes survive these big fires. Literally houses around them burned. And so that's seems to be the disconnect between, state organizations and the public is we can't take care of your property. And if you have all this overgrowth in your property and you have your firewood pushed up to your property and you just have a lot of fuels, is what they call it.
Yeah.
To your property, they're like, we physically can't do anything. If their fire is burning and it's getting close to your property, we can't send crews in there because it is unsafe for them.
Right.
So if you're not taking care of your property, there's nothing we can do for you. And so, there's always the communication issue with it. So that's a big thing. And, how much should be the responsibility of the homeowner? What about the surrounding areas? What can they do? Where should they allocate these resources? That's a big thing. So those are kind of common themes that have come up throughout the project.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, it's very multifaceted. And then that's not even addressing the Marshall Fire, because that was, in Boulder County. We're talking now about, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that people in the suburbs were supposed to mitigate their properties.
Yeah.
And that is, I don't know enough as much about that fire yet. That's my kind of future issue, because how do we incorporate this? Because it was on wildfires, but now wildfires are in the suburbs.
Right. That could be an interesting angle.
Yeah, because if you live in the mountains, you have an inherent risk of your house burning down.
Yeah.
It's part of the deal. If you're in Colorado, you're going to do it. Here's things you can do. The state's going to do what they can to help, but you have to do your best to take care of it. And it's a risk. But if you're living it's like Fort Collins burning down. You wouldn't think like, oh no, let me mitigate around my property. So right. I don't know how we're going to deal with that one. We'll see.
Oh my goodness. It's crazy. Well, how do you think that, this visual representation and documentation is kind of giving a voice to people? What is the importance of having documentaries like this to kind of tell the public, hey, it's not just this government sucks kind of thing. It's not one-sided.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the importance is, education of what is your responsibility. What can you do to protect yourself?
Right.
As a person, apparently now just living anywhere, it's brought a lot of attention to people who live in houses here in the Front Range of how you can protect yourself. So it's very important. It can literally save lives and save houses. Being aware of what is your responsibility and what you can do. So that is a huge part of it, is the knowledge. And personally, I think it can be, cathartic and soothing in a way, sometimes for people to tell their stories and to be like, hey, this is what I lost, or this is how I was able to save my house. Like, one guy literally built a sprinkler on top of his house, and he had some water rights, and it was a bit of a complicated situation, but physically was wetting the outside of the building as the fire was approaching. And the house literally burned right up to there, and it didn't catch because the building was wet.
What?
So, crazy things like this where somebody wouldn't even think about that. And honestly, that's a side story, because I think that is a whole market in that, of building sprinklers around people's houses.
Yeah.
And tons of people would do that. There's actually a couple stories where people turned their sprinklers on as they left, and their area was saved because they let their sprinklers on. And how would you know about that? That's so bizarre. I wouldn't think of that if there was a fire, but now if there was a fire, I would go outside, turn my sprinklers on, and get the hell out.
Yeah, totally.
I'd be like, okay, yeah, my water bill is going to be a disaster. But if my house burns down, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to hear these things, and I'm not recommending that per se, but there's all these interesting stories that people wouldn't know about if we didn't document it. And the news covers, is doing a lot of feature stories on victims at the moment, or survivors at the moment, but they cover what's happening as it's happening, and documentary storytelling gets to look at these things in depth and really educate the public who are interested in knowing more of this is actually what happened in more in depth. It's not just, hey, stuff burned, this is the black and white, these are things you can do, this is what the state's doing. And so for us, since we're funded by them, we'll see. That's the initial goal. We'll see how the edit goes. But the initial goal was to humanize a lot of these state officials, because it's easy to get angry at the government and be like, the government's not doing enough.
Right.
But taking a look at a person who's literally away from their family for weeks on end, doing everything they possibly can above and beyond their job to try save lives with minimal funding, it's harder to get angry at that person.
Right.
You know, or somebody in charge is being like, this is the decision we have to make. We had to decide between, you know, saving this area or saving lives. And yeah, we couldn't save everything, but we did the best we can with the resources we had. And we stayed up all night. We left our families, and we literally don't take vacation days during fire season. We don't see them. We're up early, home late. We're doing what we can. I mean, how do you get mad at a person like that?
Right.
It's hard to look at the organization. You could look at the system and be mad and be like, okay, well, I need to reach out to members of Congress and vote for people who are going to send funding their way, and approve bills. But it's less of a, why didn't you do this to help me? Is, oh, you're doing the best you can with what I had instead of getting angry. How can I do something?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it sounds like you learned a ton. Is there any other takeaways that you have that have really, like, kind of changed your own perspective?
Honestly, I've just learned, I mean, are you talking about, like, as a, you know, as a human, as a civilian or citizen versus as a documentary filmmaker? Which one are you?
I think both. Both would be a good thing to learn.
Yeah, I'd say, okay, well, sort of as a person, just of, you know, your own role in taking care of your property, of what you can do. I've got a list of things that I actually need to take care of now that I've brought to my attention, because I have, like, firewood stacked up from the people who lived here before me that I've just left there. And I'm like,
right.
Dang, I need to do something about this. And I've got, like, leaves gathered around the house, and, like, that is a fire hazard.
Right.
If there was a fire right now, I've got fuel surrounding my property, and
that's never been discussed in the news, like, ever. Yeah,
that's not the issue. The issue is people burn, and this is sad. You know, this is not, what can you do? And the government is, you know, frustrated with, I'm going to say, I mean, the government's such a broad way. I'd say the state officials individually are frustrated, particularly the people who are on the ground are pretty low-level policymakers. The low-level ones are making, like, day-to-day decisions of, do we go here, do we not?
Right.
I'm just like, we physically can't come into your property. If you have trees surrounding your property, it is unsafe for us. We cannot save your house because it is impossible. And so I've learned a lot about that. I've learned a lot just about the other humans who they really are doing their best. And I don't think they make the right decisions all the time. I'm not saying that by any means. And it was kind of an ethical, transition to the documentary filmmaker part of it, because it was a bit of an ethical dilemma of, okay, we received funding from them, but we don't want to tell a biased, untrue story. But looking at it, I'm like, wow, they genuinely are. There are hundreds of and thousands of state workers, anywhere from top level senators. We've got, like, we interviewed one Colorado senator, we interviewed Bennett, and we've got Hickenlooper lined up for the end of April. So from that level, all the way down to the firefighter who's putting stuff out, to the EMT, whatever, most people who are involved in this are doing it for a passion. You probably pay more money doing other things. In firefighting, you know, is a pretty well-paying job, as well it should be, because of the risk that they go through. But they're doing their best. For the most part, I mean, when a fire hits, when these issues come, they give up their lives to do this. And yeah, I mean, like, okay, well, allocation of funding is questionable and whatever, and there probably needs to be some things addressed, but it really made me realize how hard these people are trying. So I don't feel that ethical dilemma as much. It's going to come back when I edit, of how do I tell this balanced story without being like, hey, we're sponsored by the government, let me tell you their story. But how are these real people that are genuinely trying their best to save lives and to save property and to do the best for their state, how how can you be mad at these individuals? What can you do to help instead? So that's my thing. Yeah. Oh, and the story's going to change. I still, like with the voting one, that's why I was a little nervous. I was like, I'm not sure if I'm the right person because, yeah, this is the issue that I'll have to deal with every spring break. I have no idea what the story's going to look like. We've got tons of raw footage. I'm still need to figure out where it's going. But I'm sure you remember from 211 of that's documentary storytelling. It's like,
Yep.
I don't know. Let's find the story in this pile of footage.
Exactly.
We'll see where it goes. So you could talk to me in a month, and I'll be like, "Well, we're now focusing on this because it's more interesting." So
Yeah, that's the fun part about it too. You know, it's not so like cut and dry. Like step 1, step 2. You know, it can go anywhere, which is super cool. And like, it's not like you start off knowing exactly what you're gonna find out. Like, because you might get a piece of information that's like, oh my God, like, what? These people actually care? Yeah.
And that's the fun part. That's what I love about it. Is that, you know, there's more interesting stories and you're not locked into it. You know, even with us, which we'll have, you know, we're working with other people who have specific issues they would like to have addressed in some capacity. We just got to follow the interesting stuff. If we look back at the hard drive and realize we're good to go, it's great. And if not, we're like, oh, there's a missing part of the story. Let's see if we meet somebody cool, and they can totally derail the story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that process, too, of who knows? This is what I think the story is going to be now, but it could be something totally different, which I find exciting.
Yeah. Well, sweet. I just have one last question. Anything else that you want to say about wildfires, northern Colorado, wildfire management, prescribed burns, anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I think just the amount of coordination and risk that, you know, or the different organizations have to take on since, like, for the prescribed burn is like a prescribed burn, you think of, oh, this area is at high risk. In the low season, they set it on fire and some firemen watch it and make sure it doesn't burn down some houses. No, they're planning this a year in advance, and they like have to have X amount of crew, X amount of people, which then takes them out of the response. So once you take these people away, you have less firefighters that are able to respond to regular calls.
Mm-hmm.
If the conditions, like if it rains, or if the wind is too high and it's high risk. So they plan for months and months and months for a prescribed burn. And then the day of, if the wind is 1 mile too high, or, you know, there's anything happening, or it's too dry, or it's too wet, they have to cancel everything.
Oh my God.
And so it's not just, oh yeah, why aren't they doing prescribed burns? Yeah, they can go set stuff on fire, but then your house is at pretty high risk because it could get away from them. And a prescribed burn going wrong is an absolute, I mean, can you imagine people would never do, like, people never trust the government if prescribed burns went wrong on big scales.
Right.
So just the amount of thought that goes into it, that's my one thing of, it's a bigger topic than anybody could possibly imagine looking at it, even just with having all these things burn. I am so glad I don't work for any of these organizations because the amount of decisions they have to make and planning they have to do for everything to still possibly just go wrong is insane. So that's my last thought on it. And yeah, just being flexible to change as a documentary, like doing any kind of video that's not pre-scripted it's not going to be what you think it is.
Yeah. Totally.